Description: explore the 2040s, a world where aging is no longer inevitable. Medical breakthroughs have extended human lifespans to unimaginable lengths, but at what cost? Journey through the lives of two individuals grappling with the promises and perils of near-immortality. Chapter 1: The Year of Rebirth. By the year 2042, the concept of aging gracefully had become antiquated. The announcement of Somavive, a groundbreaking cellular rejuvenation therapy, had upended society. No longer was aging an unassailable force, it was now a manageable condition. In a bustling longevity hub in New Berlin, Elena Rivera stared at her reflection in the mirror. She was 67, but her appearance betrayed none of the markers of her age: no sagging skin, no graying hair. Her rejuvenation was courtesy of Somavive, which used nanobot-infused injections to repair and reverse cellular decay. "Elena, you're late again," her assistant Max called out from the hallway. "It's hard to rush perfection," she quipped, smoothing the sleeves of her graphene-infused blouse. Elena was among the first to adopt the therapy, one of the fortunate few able to afford the initial sky-high costs. As a bioethics consultant, she stood on the front lines of the socio-political battles over access to longevity technologies. Outside, neon billboards painted the city skyline, advertising wellness subscriptions that promised youth eternal and unlimited potential. Crowds gathered to protest at the gates of Somavive's headquarters, chanting demands for subsidies or free access. For the wealthy, agelessness was a new reality; for the poor, it remained a tantalizing dream. As she arrived at the Global Longevity Forum, Elena's pulse quickened. Today's keynote was a man whose very existence symbolized the revolution: Dr. Adrian Queiroz, the lead scientist behind Somavive. He was rumored to be 112 years old but appeared no older than 40. When he stepped onto the stage, the audience fell silent. "Humanity stands on the cusp of a new era," Adrian began, his voice smooth and resonant. "Yet with every breakthrough comes responsibility. Agelessness isn't just a gift, it's a burden we must share wisely." As Adrian spoke, Elena felt a flicker of unease. Would humanity wield this power wisely, or was this the beginning of a dangerous divide between the eternals and the ephemerals? Chapter 2: The Price of Time. 2 months after the forum, Elena received a call that shifted her carefully balanced world. "Elena, it's Marco," her younger brother's voice cracked through the line. "They denied me. Said I didn't meet the criteria for Somavive." Her chest tightened. Marco, at 45, had developed early-stage vascular dementia. His application for rejuvenation therapy had been deemed medically unsustainable, a euphemism for too risky to fund. "That's impossible," she replied, pacing her pristine apartment. "Let me talk to my contacts." But even as she said the words, she knew the futility of her promise. Somavive's criteria were ruthless, designed to maximize success rates and minimize public scrutiny. For all its promise, the system was deeply flawed, favoring the healthy, the young, and the wealthy. Later that week, she met Marco at a small cafe in what was once old Berlin. His once vibrant demeanor was clouded by frustration and resignation. "You think they'll ever let people like me through?" he asked, his hands trembling slightly. "Or is this just a game for the elite to keep playing while the rest of us watch?" Elena struggled for a response. Across the cafe, a young couple laughed, their conversation peppered with words like longevity credits and nano upgrades. For them, immortality was not a hope but a certainty. "I don't know, Marco," she admitted finally. "But I won't stop fighting." That night, Elena logged into the restricted government bioethics database. She scrolled through pages of research on Somavive's trials and stumbled upon an unsettling statistic: 87% of successful candidates were from the top 10% income bracket. Was humanity's greatest breakthrough destined to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots? And if so, was it truly progress? Chapter 3, The Underground Cure. Weeks turned into months, and Marco's condition worsened. Elena's efforts to push for his acceptance into the Somavive program hit one bureaucratic wall after another. But one evening, just as she was about to give up hope, she received an encrypted message on her private terminal, looking for alternatives. Meet me at level 13, Apex District, 10 p.m. Elena hesitated. Level 13 was infamous, a haven for illegal biohackers and outlawed medical experiments. As a bioethicist, she had long condemned such practices. Yet for Marco, she was willing to compromise her principles. The Apex District buzzed with neon lights and clandestine energy. At level 13, Elena found a dimly lit lab tucked behind a graffiti-splattered metal door. Inside, shelves were lined with vials of glowing liquid and stacks of hacked biotech. A man in his 50s greeted her, his face oddly expressionless, a side effect, she later learned, of a botched longevity experiment. Dr. Vale, he introduced himself, extending a gloved hand. I hear you're looking for help. Elena wasted no time. My brother needs rejuvenation therapy, but Somavive rejected him. Can you do anything? Dr. Vale nodded slowly. We've developed alternative methods, unapproved but effective. No fancy nanomeds, just raw cellular rewiring. It's risky, though. And expensive. How much? When he named the price, Elena's heart sank. It would cost more than she made in a year, but desperation drowned her caution. I'll find the money, she said, her voice resolute. When can we start? Dr. Vale smiled faintly. Bring him here next week. But understand, this isn't just about restoring health. It's about defying a system that's built to keep people like us in our place. Chapter 4, The Hidden Cost. Elena convinced Marco to undergo the treatment, though he was reluctant. I don't want to end up like one of those horror stories, he muttered as they approached the lab. Remember that guy who grew an extra lung after those illegal gene mods? Trust me, Elena reassured him, though her confidence felt paper-thin. This is your best shot. The procedure was grueling. Marco was placed in a suspension pod, his body surrounded by a shimmering gel infused with modified stem cells and microengineered proteins. Over the course of 8 hours, his cells were reset, mimicking the natural processes of youth. When the pod opened, Marco looked revitalized. His skin glowed, and the tremors in his hands were gone. I feel amazing, he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. For the first time in years, Elena felt a spark of hope. But Dr. Vale's expression remained grim. It worked, he said, but there's a catch. He handed Elena a data slate filled with medical readouts. Marco's rejuvenation had been achieved by pushing his cells into hyperregeneration mode, effectively borrowing from his future. The therapy isn't permanent, Dr. Vale explained. Unless he undergoes maintenance treatments every 6 months, his condition will rebound, and fast. This isn't true immortality. It's a subscription to life. Elena's stomach dropped. And if we can't pay for the next round? She asked. Dr. Vale shrugged. Then time will catch up to him, more quickly than before. Marco was ecstatic, unaware of the strings attached to his newfound health. As they left the lab, Elena wrestled with her guilt. Had she saved her brother, or merely delayed the inevitable? Outside, a holographic advertisement for Somavive loomed over the street, its tagline glowing in gold, "Eternity awaits, if you can afford it." For Elena, the weight of the question grew heavier. Was the fight for longevity worth the price of inequality and endless dependence? Chapter 5, The Eternal Divide. Marco's transformation drew attention almost immediately. Neighbors and colleagues whispered behind his back, some envious, others suspicious. The stark lines of rejuvenation were unmistakable, and those who couldn't afford it often viewed the recipients with disdain. Elena began noticing the cracks in Marco's euphoria. Though his body was youthful, his mind retained the scars of his struggles with dementia. At times, he forgot names or repeated stories, symptoms that didn't quite align with the flawless image of rejuvenation advertised by Somavive. "It's like I've got a new engine, but the controls are still buggy," Marco joked one evening. His laugh was forced, his eyes shadowed by an unspoken fear. Elena's work, meanwhile, had taken a darker turn. Reports of underground treatments spreading across cities like wildfire reached her desk daily. Some were successful, like Marco's, but many others left patients disfigured, or worse, dead. Her boss, Dr. Amir Patel, confronted her one day. "You're distracted, Elena. If you're going to be effective here, you need to stay neutral." "Neutral?" Elena snapped. "People are dying because we've put a price tag on life itself. Neutrality isn't an option anymore." Dr. Patel sighed. "Idealism won't fix this, Elena. The system is flawed, but it's what we have. You've seen the numbers, universal access would collapse the economy. So we let millions die because their wallets aren't deep enough." "No," Patel said softly. "We let a few live, so humanity as a whole can advance." The conversation haunted Elena. She began compiling data on the growing disparity, preparing a report to expose the inequities in Somavive's system. But she knew the cost of such defiance, her career, and possibly her safety, were on the line. Chapter 6, The Ephemeral Rebellion. One night, Marco returned from a support group for ephemerals, those who had been denied or couldn't afford rejuvenation. His excitement was palpable. "Elena, you've got to meet them," he said. "They're fighting back in ways you wouldn't believe." Reluctantly, Elena accompanied him to a gathering in the basement of an abandoned library. The room was filled with people of all ages, their faces a mix of defiance and desperation. At the center stood a charismatic woman named Nia Kessler, a former Somavive engineer turned whistleblower. Nia's voice carried a magnetic urgency as she addressed the crowd. "The future they're building isn't for us. It's for the few. But we can take back what they've stolen." She revealed plans for a decentralized network of biohacking clinics, aimed at democratizing access to rejuvenation therapies. The technology wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "This isn't just about living longer," Nia said, her gaze locking with Elena's. "It's about living with dignity. Are you with us?" Elena hesitated. She had spent her career navigating the ethical gray zones of medical innovation, and joining an outright rebellion felt like crossing an irrevocable line. "This is dangerous," she whispered to Marco as the room erupted in applause. "And doing nothing isn't." Marco shot back. "You've seen the data. You know how many people are suffering while a handful of elites hoard immortality." For the first time in her life, Elena found herself standing at a crossroads. She could continue working within the system, trying to reform it incrementally, or she could risk everything to join the rebellion and push for radical change. As the crowd chanted around her, she felt the weight of their hope. The question wasn't just what she believed in, it was what she was willing to sacrifice for it. Chapter 7, The Line Crossed. Elena couldn't sleep that night. Marco's words echoed in her mind, intertwining with Nia's call to action. The thought of turning her back on the rebellion felt like betrayal, not just to Marco, but to everyone left behind by the system. The next day, she made her decision. In the shadows of New Berlin's towering spires, Elena met Nia in a private alcove. The ex-engineer's piercing blue eyes searched hers as if to measure her resolve. "You're sure about this?" Nia asked. I can give you access to Somavive's classified archives, Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. But if they trace it back to me, I'm done. Nia's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. Welcome to the fight. Elena began smuggling data out of Somavive's secure servers. Blueprints for longevity treatments, classified reports on failed trials, and incriminating documents exposing how the company had deliberately inflated costs to keep the technology exclusive. The more she uncovered, the angrier she became. Somavive hadn't just denied access to the poor, it had actively sabotaged efforts to create affordable alternatives. The company's ethos wasn't to save humanity but to control it, one rejuvenated customer at a time. The rebellion wasted no time. Nia's network used the leaked data to improve their biohacking treatments. Clinics began popping up across the world, their locations spread through encrypted channels. Within weeks, thousands of people had undergone illegal rejuvenation, their hope renewed in defiance of Somavive's monopoly. But the rebellion's actions did not go unnoticed. Chapter 8, The Hunt Begins. Somavive's retaliation was swift and brutal. Using surveillance drones and infiltrators, they began dismantling the underground clinics one by one. Arrests were made, and some unlucky patients found themselves facing catastrophic side effects from hastily implemented therapies. Elena knew the clock was ticking. Her involvement in the rebellion would be discovered sooner or later. Late one night, as she reviewed another batch of leaked documents, her terminal blinked with a warning, unauthorized access detected. Panic surged through her. The Somavive internal security team had found her. Marco burst into her apartment moments later, his face pale. We need to leave. Now. As they grabbed what they could, Elena's terminal lit up with an incoming call. Dr. Patel's face appeared on the screen. I warned you, Elena, he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. Whatever you think you're achieving, it won't last. You're playing with forces you can't control. And what about you? Elena shot back. How do you sleep at night, knowing you've built a system that kills more people than it saves? Patel's expression hardened. You've crossed a line. There's no coming back from this. Before she could reply, Marco yanked the power cord, cutting the connection. We don't have time for arguments, he said, pulling her toward the door. The streets of New Berlin were eerily quiet as they fled to a safe house provided by the rebellion. Inside, Nia was already waiting, flanked by two engineers monitoring a live feed of Somavive's crackdown. They're getting bolder, one of the engineers muttered. Nia turned to Elena. We're going to need something big to push back. A way to expose them on a global scale. Do you have anything explosive? Elena hesitated, then handed Nia a data stick. This, she said, is proof that Somavive has suppressed a formula for universal rejuvenation. They've had it for years but kept it hidden to protect their profits. Nia's eyes widened. This could change everything. Elena nodded. If we survive long enough to use it. As the rebellion prepared to release the data, Elena felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The line between right and wrong had blurred long ago, but one thing was clear, the world would never be the same. Chapter 9, The Day of Reckoning. The rebellion's plan was as audacious as it was dangerous. Nia and her team would broadcast the suppressed formula for universal rejuvenation, along with proof of Somavive's crimes, to every network and public feed on the planet. But the move came with a dire risk. Somavive's countermeasures would be swift and ruthless. In a hidden bunker beneath New Berlin, Elena, Marco, and Nia gathered with the core members of the movement. Holographic schematics of Somavive's digital infrastructure flickered on the walls, highlighting vulnerabilities. The formula is ready for release, said one of the engineers. But once we hit send, there's no undoing it. Nia nodded and turned to Elena. You should be the one to launch it. You've sacrificed the most to get us here. Elena hesitated, her hand hovering over the console. For a moment, she thought of her life before all of this, her stable career, her quiet ideals. It all seemed so distant now. Do it, Marco urged, his voice steady. This isn't just for me. It's for everyone. Taking a deep breath, Elena pressed the button. Instantly, the bunker's monitors lit up with activity. Across the globe, the formula began appearing on every screen, accompanied by damning evidence of Somavive's deceit. Social media platforms exploded with outrage, and news channels interrupted their programming to cover the unfolding scandal. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Somavive's headquarters were surrounded by angry protesters, their chants echoing through the city. Governments demanded answers, while health organizations scrambled to assess the formula's validity. But the rebellion's triumph was short-lived. Chapter 10, The Counterstrike. As the formula spread, Somavive deployed its emergency protocols. Swarms of autonomous drones descended on suspected rebellion hubs, disabling communications and detaining anyone linked to the broadcasts. The bunker shook violently as an explosion erupted nearby. Dust rained from the ceiling, and alarms blared. They found us. Nia shouted. We need to move. Elena grabbed Marco's hand, her heart pounding as the group fled through a hidden tunnel. Behind them, the monitors displayed a grim sight, Somavive's CEO addressing the world in a carefully orchestrated response. The formula released by these radicals is incomplete and highly dangerous, the CEO declared. We urge everyone to avoid unauthorized treatments. Our team is working tirelessly to ensure public safety. The statement sowed doubt among the global population. Was the formula truly universal, or was it another risk-riddled experiment? They're trying to discredit us, Marco said as they emerged into a deserted alley. They won't succeed, Elena replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The group regrouped at a secondary safe house, where Nia updated them on the fallout. Some clinics are already replicating the formula, she said. But Somavive's scare tactics are working. People are afraid to trust us. Elena leaned against a wall, exhaustion weighing her down. We need proof, she said. Something undeniable to show the world that the formula works, and that Somavive lied about it. Nia's gaze sharpened. Then we find someone who's willing to take the ultimate risk. A public figure who can demonstrate the formula's power live, with the whole world watching. Elena's stomach turned at the implication. The rebellion needed a hero, but at what cost? As the room fell silent, Marco stepped forward. I'll do it, he said. Elena's head snapped up. No. You can't. I can and I will, Marco insisted. This fight gave me a second chance. If I can prove it's real, maybe it'll give millions of others the same. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she saw the determination in her brother's face. He was no longer the frightened man clinging to survival. He had become a symbol of resistance, and he was ready to embrace it, no matter the cost. Chapter 11, A Leap of Faith. The rebellion's plan came together with breathtaking urgency. The broadcast would air from an undisclosed location, streamed live to millions of devices. Marco would publicly undergo the rejuvenation treatment derived from the leaked formula, proving that it was safe, effective, and accessible. The day of the demonstration arrived quickly. Marco sat in a sterile room, illuminated by bright overhead lights. Cameras surrounded him, their lenses unblinking. Nia and Elena stood nearby, their faces tense as they prepared for the world to watch. You don't have to do this, Elena whispered, gripping Marco's hand. There's still time to back out. He smiled faintly, the confidence in his eyes unwavering. "This isn't just about me, Elena. This is about proving that life belongs to everyone, not just the people who can buy it." The treatment process was grueling. Marco was injected with the formula, a cocktail of modified proteins and microbots engineered to reverse cellular damage. His body convulsed briefly as the rejuvenation began, and for a terrifying moment, the room held its collective breath. But then, the transformation unfolded before their eyes. Marco's skin smoothed, his posture straightened, and the weariness that had clung to him for years seemed to dissolve. When he opened his eyes, they sparkled with vitality. Gasps erupted from the technicians and rebels watching the feed. Around the world, audiences were stunned. Social media exploded with hashtags like #UniversalLife and #Somalis. Marco stood, his voice steady as he addressed the cameras. "This is what they've kept from us. A world where age and illness don't dictate our lives. It's not just a dream, it's real. And it belongs to all of us." Chapter 12, The Turning Point. The broadcast sent shockwaves through society. Protests erupted in every major city, demanding the immediate release of the universal rejuvenation formula. Governments faced unprecedented pressure to regulate Somavive and make longevity treatments accessible to all. But the corporation wasn't ready to surrender. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, Somavive deployed an aggressive PR campaign, accusing the rebellion of endangering lives with untested, unsafe treatments. Meanwhile, Elena and Nia worked tirelessly to validate the formula. Collaborating with sympathetic scientists and labs, they published peer-reviewed studies proving its safety and effectiveness. Each report chipped away at Somavive's credibility, but the battle was far from over. Marco, now a public figure, became the face of the movement. Crowds chanted his name, and his story inspired millions to demand change. Yet the strain of his newfound fame took its toll. One night, as the siblings sat together in a rare moment of quiet, Marco turned to Elena. "Do you think it'll be enough?" he asked. She sighed, her gaze distant. "It has to be. The world can't go back to the way it was." But she knew the fight for equality and longevity was only beginning. Somavive's empire wouldn't crumble overnight, and the struggle to ensure universal access to life extension technologies would be a long and arduous journey. The rebellion had lit a fire, but keeping it burning would require courage, sacrifice, and unity on a scale humanity had never seen before. As the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, Elena looked at her brother and smiled. "We changed the world today, Marco. And we're just getting started."